Hey, Helen here, your host. Great to have you along for the second season of The Beautiful Side of Grief, where we continue to hear from people from all walks of life who have faced or have been involved with heart-wrenching loss and who have come out the other side with so many positives to share with others. I know this may seem like an impossibility for you right here, right now, to be in that space. And believe me, I understand. I lost my own gorgeous 18-year-old daughter and only child in a car accident. Yet, here I am 4 years later, sharing my own journey and those of others in the most heartwarming and joyful way. Each and every one of my guests share their own beautiful insights and their strategies for getting through their grief. And through these stories, I hope you'll find your own way to deal with your grief in whatever form that may take. I'll pop my guest links and any free resources in the episode notes, along with my website address if you'd like to know more about the energy work I do, as that was my lifesaver in my own grief journey. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you can keep informed of each weekly episode. So now let's see who our guest is this week. What do you do when 2 decades into your career, your life comes to a screeching halt when you become widowed without warning and the sole parent to 3 daughters? How do you cope when you've been thrown another curveball 18 months after losing your husband when you get a cancer diagnosis? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring with our guest today, Lydia Knorr, whose personal journey through grief, illness, and navigating some long-term unhealthy coping mechanisms served as the impetus for adopting a holistic approach to well-being that focused on the health of her body, mind, and soul. The benefits she realized prompted her to create her signature program, Discovering You, Y.O.U, Your Own Uniqueness. I love that. Where she delivers keynotes and workshops in the areas of personal growth, connection to self, and positive change. She helps people get to the heart of what truly matters to them and demonstrates how becoming more of themselves, not less, is exactly what the world needs. Lydia believes that honoring yourself by nourishing every part of your well-being is the healthiest way to live and will lead you to a thriving and fulfilling existence. In addition to her work as a speaker, educator, and author, Lydia has spent 2 years as a volunteer facilitator at the Lighthouse Center for Grieving Children, and we're going to have a chat about that in a bit more depth, working with parent groups in their journey through the loss of a loved one. And in addition, she has acted as spokesperson for bereaved families of Ontario. What an absolute pleasure to have her as my guest today. And to you, my listeners, for joining and being part of this. I'm sure you'll be able to take away some wonderful information from what Lydia has to share. And as always, may your own journey through this loss be filled with light and hope. So Lydia, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today on this episode. And just welcome, first of all.
Oh, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful introduction. And I'm so happy to have this discussion with you. I mean, we're already kindred spirits, right, through our journeys. And there's a definite connection and an appreciation for each other. And I know so much of what we'll talk about today will resonate amongst ourselves, amongst your audience, and there'll just be a lot of good energy.
Oh, yeah, I think so. As soon as I started preparing for this, I felt that connection, and I've been really excited to connect with you. So let's crack into it. Let's get into the good stuff. So your life was ticking along well already. You know, you had a career you loved, a beautiful husband, a family, and your job as a dietitian, I imagine that you were very successful in. But then you lost your beautiful husband very, very suddenly. So would you like to share what that was like for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Had the great life. I had that white picket fence, analogy I always say, and truly so blessed, except for, I found this restlessness, this moment of restlessness. This is pre his passing. Somewhere in my early 40s, I called it the midlife wife syndrome, where I'm struggling with, there's more to my life that I'm meant to be doing. I love being your wife. I love being a mom. I love the life we've created, but there's something within me that's missing. And my husband had this great way of keeping things in perspective. He'd say 2 things. He'd say, just do what makes you happy. And he'd also say, don't spend so much time thinking about it. Just be present. Enjoy the moment. I'm like, okay, sure. Like I'll tuck that away. That sounds really good. And it would seem so easy for him, right? I really envied that. anyway, so, I knew I had a good life, but there was something and I knew I'd figure it out, but, it wasn't a high priority thing on my list. But at the same time, I was watching him in his work. He traveled always throughout our marriage, but he had taken on a new job maybe about 6 months earlier. And he was traveling a lot. I mean, a lot, a lot. It was very rare that he would be back from a trip for more than a few days before he was jumping on an airplane to go somewhere else again. And I was really starting to see it wear on him because he didn't sleep well when he traveled. He didn't sleep well on an airplane. Time zones didn't agree with him. And I could really see him starting to age. And I voiced my concern because I could also see his demeanor starting to shift. He was a very happy, easygoing, fun-loving person. And he was getting quiet. And I sensed a shift in his energy. And I remember saying to him one day, are you okay? I'm worried about what I'm seeing here. And he said, yeah, no, I'm good. It's a grind. It's really, really hard right now. And it's probably going to be the next year and a half to 2 years of this type of pace, but then it will settle in. I'll build the team, I'll build the business, and everything will settle in. Well, that year and a half to 2 years, got cut short about 3 months later when he was traveling on a business trip to China. And I dropped him off at the airport on a Sunday afternoon. It was a 5-day whirlwind trip to China, and it involved 2 cities. So it was flying like 16, 17 hours to Beijing, 4-hour layover to another city. And I remember thinking, how can you do this? And he said, don't worry, I'll see you on Friday. And 3 days later, my phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I saw the name of his boss on the caller ID. And I knew, I didn't know what happened, but I knew something bad happened, obviously. And I assumed he'd had a heart attack, just given what I had been witness to. I really didn't expect the news, but the news was that we don't know what happened, but Mike is dead.
Oh, that must have been, that took me right back. I know what that feeling is. And it's
really
feeling.
I was
sorry for you.
Thank you. And I just remember I said, what happened? And they we don't know. He didn't come down for a meeting in the morning from his hotel room. We went to check on him. He was gone. And, it's funny. I have this pragmatic side, Helen. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm like, there's no reason to wake anybody up. My children, his mother with a phone call, it's not going to change what's just happened. So I remember just thinking, feeling very sort of quiet. And then all of a sudden it was just this insane feeling of love. That's the best thing I can describe it as, that came over me. And I could almost feel his transition. I thought, I feel what you have just gone through. And I just crawled over to his side of the bed and I wrapped myself up in the covers and I just felt this incredible connection to him. And then all of a sudden, this enormity, crazy as it sounds, of gratitude. I just had all these memories flooding me of what we had created together and, the family unit and his and my relationship. And I was so grateful. And I went, oh my gosh, you know what? There is something at work here in my life. Because I was this woman who was searching for something more just a few months ago, saying, something's missing for me. And now I'm feeling such a connection, whether it's to God, the universe, the angels, or my husband, or all of it. But I know that there is something very present in my life in this moment. And so whatever was to follow, that phone call in terms of the flurry of activity and everything that happened in the days and weeks and months after that, I always felt that. Like I just said, there's something that I got to covet here and remain connected to and build, like, deepen that connection. And that became my focus after he passed away, in the months that, that followed. I thought, what do I do to nurture this connection? Because I know it's there. And some of the ways that it showed itself to me were in dreams. And I believe that when dreams are really, really, really profound, Helen, and the message is so clear, and you remember every single detail, that's a message, right? Yeah. And I remember I had a couple of very, very distinct dreams with him. And in the dream, you're aware, like, I know he's passed on, and yet he's there right beside me and we're having a conversation. Yeah. And that was one of the ways in which I nurtured that relationship. But the other ways were through reading about anything and everything I could get my hands on. What happens when we die? The spirit world, how do you remain connected to your loved ones? And I would see so many parallels between other people's experiences and my own. And I thought, that's just that synchronicity. That's just the way that the universe works for you. And you can see and feel and hear your loved one in different things. I've often told people, and again, you and I had this conversation before we got live on the podcast. Some people will just say, well, whatever makes you feel better, whatever it takes, you believe in what you need to believe in. But I'll tell people, I'll say, no, I'm not trying to convince anybody of what I know, what my experience is. but I'll say it's as basic as this. I will be having a moment, where I'm feeling emotional and I'm about to think about him. I'm about to have a conversation in my head with him. And there's words in my head before I even form my thoughts. So I know it's him. You know what I mean? They're quicker than you. So I'll give you an example. I remember, COVID brought all of my girls home. They weren't living at home together at the same time, but for a period of time, they were all in the house. And so we had so many family dinners. I mean, once upon a time, that was something that was very coveted. And that was, oh my gosh, it was like Christmas having them all around the table. And then all of a sudden they're all around the table every day. And at one point we're like, we've run out of things to talk about. But I remember having this one really fun, dinner, and I took our dog out for a walk after dinner. And I was just feeling my heart was so happy and full for what I had just experienced with my girls. And I was just about to say, I knew where I was going with my thoughts. I was about to say, oh, Mike, I wish you were here. And before I even formed the thought, what came into my head? I haven't missed a thing. I haven't missed a thing. And that was him. And I'm like, I know you haven't missed a thing, but those words were there. And I smile and I shrug. And I have so many examples, I could go on and probably write, a journal about all the examples of things. But so go ahead. I think you have a question.
No, let's explore this further, because I still get this, because, I was very pragmatic about my daughter. Like, it was like, I just understood that she wasn't coming back. So I just knew that I just needed to deal with this. And I just got on with the job, so to speak. But also, like you, I had this amazing experience right from the get-go of losing her. I knew when her accident had happened. However, that's not a typical response or reaction to grief. And I felt that some people really struggled with how well I was actually handling it, just getting on with the practical side of things. And it was because I felt surrounded in her love, and I felt safe, and I felt I could keep going. And actually, I felt like she cocooned me for 6 months, and then sort of let it me come to grips with it in another way after that. But let's explore that. Did you have a similar reaction when your own family or your friends were going, oh, you're coping way too well with this?
Yes. Absolutely. I had people saying to me, like, I can't get over how resilient you are. I got up to speak at his funeral. I remember the first few nights, because he died in China, it took about 8 days or so to get his body home from China. So I had time, before the funeral or anything, just to sit with things. And I would wake up every night in the middle of the night and just sit with my thoughts. And I remember there were a few nights where I was thinking, if somebody were here with me right now, these are all the things I would want to say about him to them. And then I realized, you have an opportunity to do this. You can do this at his funeral. You can speak, honor his memory at his funeral. And so, first and foremost, I think getting up and standing up, in a church full of standing room only people shocked a lot of people. But I felt so calm in the moments leading up to that, and knowing I could. And I felt his arms around me. I'm not kidding you. I remember looking at his picture that I had in the church, and I smiled at him, and I felt his arms around me. And I also remember hearing him say, because in my career as a dietitian, one of my favorite things that I did, and it really was the highlight that I wanted to explore more in my career, was working in media. So working from a stage. And I literally heard his voice as I was walking up, in front of the church, in front of all of these people, saying, well, aren't you in your element right now? He was always joking with me, right? And so of course it made it light. I could keep it light. And it wasn't what I had to say wasn't heavy. I wanted to honor who he was. It was a celebration of his nature, his demeanor, all the things people loved about him. And so when I spoke, I said, when you remember Mike, remember him in the gifts that he gave you his time. He always made you feel like you were the only person in that moment with him. He made you feel important. So I said, just take time to honor him and smile, because he always made you smile and laugh. He was a lighthearted person. So do the same. Don't cry. Just remember him with time and with smiles. So, it was a very, very peaceful moment. I think the thing that I took away from my journey, the thing that I was trying to hold on to when I established that initial connection, was the peace I felt. And that was the thing that I kept going after. And that's what I finally discovered. And that's what I realized he meant by enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
When you're in the moment, you're peaceful. You're not thinking about what you've been through, and you're not worrying about what the unknown is in the future. When you are completely in the moment and present, you are at peace. And that was the missing piece for me. I'm like, that is what I've been searching for. And so this became our
Oh,
message. This became, and now all of a sudden it was amazing. It was like mapped out for me. And again, that's all of that, or, surrounding you, that's working for you. Right. And I remember thinking, this is what you need to go out and speak to people about. You already know that you love stage. And in the past, I was speaking about physical well-being, about nutrition and healthy eating, but I wanted a more authentic message. And so my message became about nourishing your inner well-being, finding your inner peace and finding a sense of balance and alignment in every junction in your life. And so that's how, and then all of a sudden I went, wow, I've just discovered me, like the most authentic me. And then all of a sudden I went, oh, that's what I got to do. I got to teach people how to discover your own uniqueness. And,
oh gosh. Oh my God. I'm loving this because I resonate with this so, so strongly, because I remember just within days having that epiphany. Wow, the worst has happened to me. Nothing worse than this can happen. So bring it on. I don't care anymore what people think. I don't care anymore if they don't like what I'm doing. I'm just going to be me, and I'm going to own me. And for the first time, I felt some freedom in my life to be me.
And see, that's the thing, right? And, you and I both know the grief journey is so not linear. And we'll get into this too. My journey wasn't linear, even following this as strong as I was. And I never lost that connection. There were so many other things that happened in my life that, that made it, non-linear. And it's everybody's journey to work through in their own time, in their own way, at their own pace, in whatever way feels best to them. So, I think my biggest advice to someone who's going through the grief journey, of course, you can get support and do things to nourish your soul and all of the things, but you need to do what makes you feel good. Nobody knows you better than you. That's the whole thing about discovering you. So it's about nourishing your inner well-being in whatever way feels right for you, and whatever anybody else thinks, it's not their journey. Right? You need to do what makes sense and feels best for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100% agree with that. And that's, people have to give themselves permission to do that though.
Yeah.
And that's often what we're not very good at doing.
Yeah.
It's allowing ourselves to feel and do what we most need for ourselves.
Right.
Tell me, with your experience, did that allow you to be able to focus more on your girls in those early days? Because it's almost like, you had that light bulb go on and you knew there was something bigger there. And, you had 3 girls that were probably struggling dreadfully with the loss of their dad.
Mm-hmm.
How did you cope with that?
It's interesting because we were very, very close. They were extremely close to their dad, especially my older 2 girls. And I will honestly say, I think my older 2 girls were probably closer to their dad than they were to me. He used to say, Lydia, if you had my earning potential, I'd stay home with the kids. So, but, and they each grieved very independently and very individually. I did put them in some support groups, which were super beneficial for them, because it allowed them to be with people their own age who had been through similar losses. And so it was really good to have a safe space to share. But I would say the spiritual journey was my own and wasn't my own. It was my own in that it was something that was really helping me to make sense, make peace, and connect with him and with what had happened. I don't feel that they necessarily subscribed to it the same way I did, but I also didn't hold back from speaking about it. I didn't push it on them. I didn't say, oh, you need to believe this, because in fact, my middle daughter, who's very, very pragmatic too, and she said to me, Mom, I'm glad you found something that makes you feel better. She said, but I'm very black and white. And she said, so I'm not so sure I subscribe to this. And I said, and I don't think your father would have either until I connected with him. But he's on the other side. So, I said, I totally respect that. They are much older now. I mean, it's been 8 years. And I would say they definitely all have a sense of spirituality. They certainly see the role that it's played in my life and the work that I do. And so if nothing else, they have an incredible respect for it. And I think they're very, very open to it. I don't know that I know that they haven't had the same experience as I have, but that's okay. Life will hand them things where they need to draw on something. And I think maybe just having had the exposure and seeing what I do and even the way that I don't approach my work so much from a spirituality. I talk about inner spirit, but really what I do is I encourage people to get in touch with the truest part of themselves, whatever you want to call it, your spirit or your instinct, your gut, your soul, your heart, whatever you want to call it. Just get in touch with that part that knows you best and honor it, because we all have it and we're all aware of it. And so if nothing else, they understand the concept and the practices will come.
Yeah. Great. Already, this has been so valuable. We're only minutes into it. So tell me, because I know that you volunteered and worked with grieving children, what do you think are the key things that children really mostly need that perhaps we're not aware of?
I can only speak from the experience that my girls had. So my facilitation was actually with parents of, with parent groups, but, for my girls' experiences and the feedback that they gave me, and in doing the facilitation courses myself, really what the whole premise behind the journey of going to a grief group is to have a safe space to share. And you could always, you didn't have to contribute to whatever was being asked. You could share, you could not share. But my experience from my girls and from their feedback was that, and it was my experience as well, even just sitting with parents, there's such a kinship among people. Like, their friends were really supportive, but their friends didn't get it. Right. But when you're sitting amongst people, complete strangers who have lost as well, there's an immediate connection there. And it's a connection that other people don't understand. So it creates a safe space. And it was really interesting too, because my daughter's perspectives also, based on some of the other people who were sharing their losses, my girls realized how lucky they were. How lucky they were that their dad was here one day and then he was gone the next day. But they had such beautiful memories of him. There was no illness that they had to observe. There was no suicide. There was no whatever other people's experiences were. They would walk away and say to me, gosh, we're so lucky. Like, yeah, of course we've lost and we miss him, but we're so lucky the relationship. Like, so it was really eye-opening for them. But the big takeaway that was that they just felt safe. And it's interesting because when I first started taking them to the grief group, at that time, they didn't have an organized group for the parents. So sometimes I would drop them off and sometimes I would just sit in the waiting room and wait. And ironically, when I took my girls that year, it was all girls in their group who had all lost fathers. Sort of ironic.
Oh, no.
So all of the women, like all of the people in the waiting room were mothers, right? And women. And so there was this immediate connection. And we would just sit amongst ourselves and have a tea and talk. And I just remember feeling, again, I don't know what your experience has been because your loss was different than what I experienced, but oh my gosh, I feel so safe in being able to just open up and know that on some very fundamental, profound level, you understand, right? Because we all understand the pain.
Yeah. For me, it was, because it was my daughter, what really mattered most to me was her friends of the same age. 18 is a young age to lose somebody and in such a way. And I know that even now, 4 years later, some of them are still dealing with that. Get the odd message come through, and I know that they're thinking of her because she made an impact. She was like walked in a room and you couldn't ignore her type of child. and for me, it was really, really heartful for me to reach out. And in fact, I was down in Hawke's Bay where I was living at the time, and went out to dinner with one of her friends, and we just got this amazing connection, and it's so beautiful, and I treasure those. So,
and I love what you just said about your daughter, and I definitely feel the same way about Mike. Obviously your daughter was so young, and it's just so tragic, and I'm so sorry. But you said that she would walk in a room and you couldn't not notice her. She made her imprint, right? She made her impact. And that was my husband as well. 49 is pretty young to go. But he made such an impact. He did the job he was here to do, and he touched so many lives. And to this day, it's one of the things that I would definitely encourage people to do is keep them alive in whatever way makes sense and feels good for you. And because my husband was very funny and very quirky, he had all of these, like, we call them Mike-isms. His name was Mike. And my kids have a running list of things Papa used to say, and they would pull it out at the dinner table at some of those COVID dinners, and we would laugh. And then inevitably we're like, where did he come up with this stuff? But, in talking with friends that we haven't seen for a really long time, because, as you mentioned, I was published in a great book. And so some of my friends bought the book, and I connected with someone I hadn't seen for years that used to work with Mike. And he said, oh my gosh, we still bring up our Mike-isms all the time and talk about the quirky stuff he used to say. And it's such a beautiful way to keep him alive. And as I said at the funeral home, like they keep him alive by smiling and laughing, because that's what he did for you when he walked into a room. Mike's here, and it's like the energy was so much better because he had just shown up. And so I just think, there's a reason. They made their mark, right? And they did the work they were meant to do here. And I'll tell you, talking about connecting, I've had a really interesting dream where he visited me. And I mean, it sort of cryptic in terms of what he told me he's doing where he is, but it's very much aligned with what he was doing here, just on a very different level. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, that's no surprise. Like, of course you've been doing that. Of course you're in with the big ones up there.
And I've said with my daughter, like, it's just like, apparently, she just transitioned and just went straight into helping others up there. And I always knew from the moment she was born that she was an old soul. Like, as soon as she came into this world, I used to think, wow, you've been here before. So I really, really knew that and felt that. So that made a big impression. And I think it's important that we allow ourselves to talk about our loved ones, but also allow others to talk about them, because I know that I learned some really beautiful information that I never knew about my daughter. And, it fills my heart to hear the stuff that made me really, really proud that she was doing these things among her own peers. And she never shared that with me as her mum, because she was just getting on doing stuff. But to hear those things, where I just used to go, wow, warms your heart, such good information. So talk about them, keep them alive, because just because they're gone doesn't mean to say they're forgotten. Exactly the opposite.
No. And I think, yeah, it's that fine line for a lot of people, depending on who you're speaking with, about, moving on and moving forward, right? We always hear that expression. And I think both are really important in the journey. And the way I would describe them, I mean, moving on is moving on from the really painful stuff so that you can move forward into new experiences in your life. And moving forward is taking what you've learned from the experience, the positives, and bringing it into new opportunities and experiences too. But the thing is, they coexist simultaneously, right? Like, and I know, you can be happy in one moment and sad. You can still be grieving them, but love, in the same breath. It's simultaneous, right? So they do coexist, and there's no clear cut. You hear about the 7 steps or whatever they are. I'm going to tell you something. I never, ever, ever got angry. I never got angry.
Same with me.
Yep. And I think it's because of that connection we had right away, right?
Yeah, the understanding. And acceptance. I went straight to acceptance.
Yeah.
And I never asked why.
Yes.
That was a futile thing to do. So
I knew it though. So, and people would say to me, because I never got a clear answer as to how he died. I think he died from exhaustion. I think it was just because I had the coroner do an autopsy on him when the body came back from China. She couldn't find anything. She said it's probably just a heart arrhythmia where the heart skips a beat and stops. Now, bear in mind that I told you what I had witnessed, in the months leading up to this trip. And I knew he was exhausted. So I think he died from exhaustion. But here's the thing, and it's a part of the acceptance. People would say to me, how can you be okay not knowing how he died? And I would say the how is irrelevant. It's the why. I said the why is because it was his time. His job here was done. It was his time. And I've always believed that. I believed it before. And of course, after the connection, the immediate connection, more so than ever, it was his time. And it was also, for me, it was part of our soul's agreement in this lifetime to be together for as long as we were, right? And I knew right away, based on what I'd been through, Helen, and I've said this so many times, my husband's passing was my spiritual awakening. That's exactly what it was intended to be for me, and to allow me to open myself up to what's next for me. So, so we're still working together, right? We're still together.
Oh, gosh, I can't even explain this. It's like
I can see it on your face.
About my own life, because that's exactly what I did. I thought to myself, if we had a soul contract and I knew that this was going to happen, I signed up to this, and so did she. And so, as tough as it is here and now, that's what we agreed to, and that's what I'm going to accept, because she gave me a big checklist, ticking off a checklist very early into, her passing. And I went, oh, no, I want you a bit longer. But, that was again, no, Mum, done what I need to here. And I constantly learned from her, it was just amazing. So I love that. Now let's go down. The 18 months later, you get this diagnosis of cancer. Oh my gosh, you've just got yourself through that first milestone of losing your husband and all of that, and then whammo, you get hit with that. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I had been chasing down some issues in my throat prior to him passing away. But of course, I don't know what the healthcare system's like in New Zealand, but in Canada, unless it's a critical thing, you'll get an appointment with a specialist 5-6 months down the road. And so, there was that period of time where I knew that we're going to follow whatever's we're feeling in my throat with a specialist. And that was before my husband passed away. And then he passes away. And then I meet with a specialist. And long story short, I find out that I have thyroid cancer, but it's spread all the way into my lymph nodes, halfway up my neck. And thyroid cancer in and of itself is not typically that serious, but long and short of it was I ended up having 2 surgeries in 9 months, and it was a stage 4. So it was a pretty extensive cancer.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I ended up sweeping it under the rug. And I'll tell you why. Because I felt very comfortable in the care that I was given, and that I was really determined that, what, this is good. I'm going to trust 100% in what I'm being told. We're going to take it out. We're going to treat it, and we're good. But I think it was also my way of being able to protect everybody else from what they'd already not protect them from what they'd been through, but protect them from any further grief or concern or worry. So, I said, this is my thing, right? The cancer is my thing. So I'm just going to keep it small. I didn't even tell any of my friends. I told my kids, I told my mom, told my sisters, but I didn't tell anybody until after I had the surgeries. And because I just felt like this is something that I can keep to myself. I'm already the woman who's lost her husband, and everybody's still grieving the loss of my husband. And I don't want to give anyone anything more to worry about. In retrospect, that was a big disservice. It was a big miss on my part, because cancer is cancer. And if he hadn't died, it would have been a big deal. But in relation to having lost him, and just the way we lost him so suddenly, and all of it, and the magnitude of the loss and what everybody was feeling, I just thought, this is really small. So let's just put it aside. We'll deal with it and whatever. Things come back to bite you sometimes, when you don't deal with them. And I mean, honestly, as much as I made that spiritual connection and that was my driving force, I probably still would have benefited in some ways based on some things that I never talked to people about. I would have benefited in many ways in times in my life, probably speaking to somebody professionally, as I did with my kids, putting them into a grief group. I never did that. So looking back, at the journey, I can say, yeah, there's a lot of things I might have done differently. In the end, where I've netted out today, I'm not wearing my cape right now, Helen, but I run around with my superhero cape all the time because that's how I feel. But yeah, it's not linear. And so sometimes you end up, the walls come down when you shut your door at the end of the day and you walk into your house and you say, okay, you know what? I need a shut off button. And so for a number of years, wine became my shut off button. And, so that kind of rocked the boat a little bit in my house with my kids, because they didn't have that sense of stability from their one remaining parent, someone who, they needed me to be on all the time. And I just all the time.
Tell me, did this diagnosis surprise you after living a life where nutrition and fitness were the cornerstone of your well-being?
Did the diagnosis surprise me? A little bit. And I remember having a really, really interesting moment. So when I got the diagnosis and my specialist said, okay, so this is how it's going to go down. You're going to have surgery. And after surgery, we're going to do this radioactive iodine treatment and you're good to go. And so I'm like, okay, let's do it. And it was a big surgery. I think the initial one was almost 8 hours, and, because you're around the jugular vein and the vocal cords and all these things. But I remember it wasn't until I met the surgeon and he kind of told me what it would look like and how it would all go down. And I remember sitting in my car and I had a moment. I broke down, not too bad, but I did. And I remember saying to Mike, I'm not ready to be with you yet. I'm not ready, because I had just gone on this wonderful spiritual journey. And I wanted to take everything that I'd learned from losing him and share it with the world. And I wanted to still be there for my kids. And I remember very specifically saying, I'm not ready to be with you yet. And that was a really important moment for me to note where I was in my grief journey, because probably in the first 6 months, even though there was a lot of acceptance, there was so much sadness too. I mean, and I know when someone says, what does a broken heart feel like? We can say we know what a broken heart feels like.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember, so that period, that first 6 months or so where my heart was just shattered, and I was just moment to moment, just trying to do the things that I could nurture that I could do to nurture myself and to contain, remain connected with that connection. To a year and a half later, I'm like, I'm not ready to be with you now, because I'm starting to feel strong within myself, like stronger, much stronger. So it was really interesting, but yeah, from a nutrition perspective, yeah. And you know what? I did walk the talk my entire life. I was healthy and fit, and certainly by day anyway. By night, not so much, but it's all part of the learning journey. What I have learned is that there are no mistakes, Helen, as long as you can take every opportunity as something that you can learn from and grow from, even if it's not the right path you choose. And I mean, yeah, over the last 8 years, whether it's professionally or personally, I've made some decisions that maybe weren't the best ones for me, but I learned, right? I learned from them. And so,
Wow.
all good.
So let's explore this a little bit further, because you've got a great expression that you used, living steady by day, unsteady by night. And I want to explore this a bit further, because I know that there are going to be listeners who relate to this. And I know it was probably a double-edged sword for you because of your health and fitness background, but you must have known on some level what numbing your soul like this, that it wasn't ideal, that it wasn't healthy for you, that it wasn't good for you. Mm-hmm. So just help us understand those two sides.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to, as best as I can. I still, I haven't had a drink in a year or more, but, these are the conversations I have with myself, trying to reconcile and understand the behavior. And I'll tell you, when I say I was healthy by day, I would be going out for a run in the morning, Helen, and I would be having this conversation in my head saying, you're such a Jekyll and Hyde. You're such a Jekyll and Hyde, because look at you by day and then look at you by night. From a health and nutrition perspective, yeah, it's, the practice doesn't seem to align. I think this, what happened was I realized what inevitably allowed me to really step into who I want to be and how I want to show up was everything in my life was aligning. Those messages I got early on, this is what you need to be doing. This is what your message is. This is, what you want to be speaking from the stage. All of it was so succinct and just made sense for me. Like I said, it was almost like I'd had a roadmap, set out for me. And then the alcohol was the piece that didn't fit. And so I said to myself, how does this fit in here? It doesn't fit in here, right? And who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? There's so many reasons to not have this in your life. So, like many people have said to me, well, you could have just dialed it back. And I'm like, yeah, no, you know what? Yeah, I could have, but it just didn't align with, I'm so all about nourishment. I mean, that's been my background for 25 years. And I'm so all about well-being, and it just didn't fit. So for me, it was an easy no when I finally just said, I'm ready to own it. How do I want to show up? It was an easy no. And I literally woke up one day and said, done. I'm done.
Okay. But I think it was really important that you went on that journey. And like you say, don't shame yourself or guilt yourself over that, because there's always a reason why we need to have that awareness and go through that additional layer of pain or whatever it is. Because when we start to unwrap it, we actually discover a lot of things about ourselves, maybe things that we've been suppressing, or we've been trying to maintain an image that we just needed to actually say, oh, there's this and that too, and that's not looking so pretty. And, so I'm human, I'm real. And there's that outright pain.
Yeah. And I'll say, so I'm going to say three things to that. So yes, sure. Right. And I would say there is the pain. I would say it played a different role in my life at different times. Right. I mean, it's not like I started to drink after my husband died. I always liked wine. I liked it socially. I liked it socially and maybe a bit too much. But then, of course, it became something else in my life after he died. And towards the end, honestly, I think the reason it was easy for me to walk away from it at the end was because it had just become habitual. And I recognized that. I'm like, this has just become a habit. It's not even something you need anymore. But there was also in the beginning of the spiritual journey and going out on a stage and speaking about it. Then I took a step back for a while. I think I was getting tired of hearing my own story. Maybe I hadn't grieved enough. So it was hard for me to hear it all the time and speak it. And I also, I've heard it said, and I do make a connection with this. I've heard it said that alcohol is called spirits for a reason, because people are trying to quiet their spirit. There's something missing, or there's something missing in your spirit. And that's what you're trying to fill. It's like a void, right? So, maybe I just wasn't ready to fully embrace this message and get out there and just speak every part of my story openly and vulnerably. And I think a really neat thing that's happened for me recently, and this is, again, my daughters are older now, and, I talk to them about what I'm doing and where I feel vulnerable. I no longer feel vulnerable, obviously, from this conversation, speaking about anything, any part of my journey. But my youngest daughter, who's 20 years old, she said to me, Mom, your story is so layered, right? You have the grief journey and you have the cancer and you have the unhealthy coping mechanisms for years. And she said, a lot of people won't identify with the grief. They won't relate. They won't relate to your cancer. But she said, oh my, let me tell you, the most relatable piece of your story is the wine. She said, because even if somebody just walks in their front door at the end of a workday and takes their tie off and they, pour that big glass of wine and gulp it down and have that second, she said, it's serving something for them. There's something missing. It's doing something. So she said, this is the relatable piece to your story. This is the one that people will say, oh, me too. So people always pick up on that part in my website that says steady by day, unsteady by night. Or I think it's somewhere I say something like, have you ever felt a need to whatever? And I thought, I know how many people are reading this and going, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
To numb. Yeah. To shut it out. Just to
shut it out. Yeah. And one other thing, I just want to say this because I've done a lot of research and reading about it. And I actually watched a brilliant TED Talk. And it was a gentleman speaking about a family member he had lost to alcoholism. And he said, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. He said, the opposite of addiction is connection. So he said, when you're disconnected, most especially from yourself, that's what the numbing is, right? You're disconnected. You're trying to shut off something, right? Yeah. And so when you can really connect and be honest with yourself and be vulnerable and feel the feels, the feels don't always feel good, but boy, it didn't take me 2 weeks, Helen, to say, who was that girl? And what did you wait so long for?
I just have a friend at the moment who's just got herself out of a narcissistic relationship. And, and she said to me just prior to that she was drinking, too much wine and that. And then I sort of asked her how it was going. And she was saying, I'm having a couple of glasses of wine. And I said, well, go for it because that's what you need in this moment to cope and to get through it. But you have awareness. And I think that's a key thing. Yeah. So you're going to get to that day where you're going to say, okay, I need to knock this on the head or I need to do something about this. Yeah. If she had no awareness or was in complete denial, I think that would be different.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, that's why I don't judge. I always say to, people when we talk about, I'm like, this is just my observation. This is my experience. I certainly not want to judge, but you just nailed something. And I think if there was something we could teach people, which is probably one of the best tools you have in your, in your personal arsenal is self-awareness.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because like anything, whether it's anger or whatever it is in your life, if you have awareness of that, then you have the ability to then do something about that. Exactly. It's when you're completely in ignorance of it and have no idea how you're affecting others by your behaviors or your attitudes or what have you. That's when it's difficult. But yeah, and like you, I never judge anybody. I'm not squeaky clean myself. So who am I to sort of start shooting around? Yeah. So, look, why is it? I want to speak about this now because you've just gone through this wonderful transformation. Why is it that I know why I need to, but why is it do you think people need to find their purpose?
I think we all have one. I think we're all, I believe, as you and I talked about earlier, when you said it was your soul's agreement with your daughter for her to be in your life for as long as she was, I believe it's same. It was mine with Mike's. We were here before and this is this lifetime and we'll be here again. And so I believe each lifetime, in each lifetime, we have a purpose. We have a reason for being here. So, and if you can find that. So the work I do isn't necessarily rooted in helping people find their purpose. It's helping them align with their most authentic selves, finding out what lights them up, what makes them feel alive. And most likely when you do that, it will lead you to something that feels purposeful, right?
Yeah. Because I believe it's about flow. For me, I know that I'm living and doing what I should be doing when things just flow for me. And when I have things cropping up that don't feel good, then I say, well, what's happening in my life that is not in alignment? I'm obviously not following my true north. And then I just use that as a guide. So let's talk about the work you do, because you talk about aging, and I love this. I so related to this. With aging comes a deeper kind of beauty and one that shines from the inside. So that's what I'm desperately hoping for myself. I've had it best. superficial, and it shows up as you move through your life. And just talk to us about that, because I think this is so, so beautiful, so empowering. And I think so many women need to be hearing this.
Yeah. Yeah. We are all, I'll tell you, I feel so blessed to have had the life I had with my husband, but I also feel so blessed to have had the learning, the awareness, the awakening I've had since. And that has allowed me to step into a place where the world is really my oyster. And
Yeah.
I can do whatever I live it however I choose. And I mean, I could choose a different path that isn't healthy or good at all, but I'm so grateful that I can, because I think so many of us really box ourselves in to others, the expectations of others or of society, and we don't give ourselves permission to step into who we were meant to be. Right.
Yeah.
And so I work with women to first get them to understand that it's okay to give yourself permission to do this. Don't wait until your kids are gone, or don't wait until your husband dies, or don't wait, give yourself permission to be. Because I always say to my girls, I was Lydia before I was a mom. I had almost 30 years before I became a mother. I had 25 years before I became a wife. So, and now I have this second chapter opportunity again. So there's so much opportunity. And I just feel that if you can live from a place where it's really rooted in who you are, you're going to show up in everything that you need to do in your life in the very best way. Right? If you're not living authentically, then you're just coasting.
It's just like a dim light as opposed to a bright shining light.
Right. So I think if we can set people on this trajectory where they're living from their heart, and they're living with like elevated energy, and their inner light is radiating, outside and emanating on everything, we're going to put the world on a healthier trajectory. And it's going to be so much more rooted in being guided by love. And isn't that what we all need?
The interesting thing is I took a trip back down to Fox Bay, where I was living for so many years with my daughter, and I spent 4 days. And honestly, I caught up with so many people. But the thing that amazed me was that everybody commented on my energy. Like, wow, you're looking so good. Da, 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 da. And that's because, yes, it's taken me a long time, but I truly am owning what I want to be doing now. And it's not always easy to do podcasting, start from scratch, teach yourself how to do it, then try to get an audience, all those sorts of things. It's not easy. Yeah. But I absolutely love it, because I get to speak to people like you, and my passion comes out, and it feeds something within my soul. And I so love that.
And I think you just nailed it. I think you need to if you can find that thing that feeds your soul, and when you asked about my kids and if they're on the same path, I'll give you a really nice, quick little story. My middle daughter has been living on and off for the last few years in the mountains in Western Canada, in British Columbia. And I went to visit her, and I'd never been there in the summertime. I'd been there in the winter because it's a big ski area. And I was humbled, first of all. I think I spent pretty much every day crying, just being humbled by the magnificence of the nature around me. And I said to her, I absolutely understand why you want to be here. And she said, Mom, it just does. I just can't explain what it does for my soul. I said, oh, I do understand. Believe me, I understand things that nurture your soul very well. So I'm so glad you found that. But you're absolutely right. And people feed on that. When I get feedback, Helen, especially, I'm so touched when it's my kids, friends who will follow my social media and say, just watch that interview. You're amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. We need your voice. And it affirms that I'm doing what my soul's work is for this lifetime. And, sharing our stories just makes us relatable and connects us to people. And I believe that when we share our stories, and if one person's life can be impacted by it, and they feel safer to go out and share their story, then we're doing the work we're meant to be doing, and it's all about that connection piece, right? It's all about, not having to turn to those unhealthy coping mechanisms when we can connect on a level that feels really authentic.
So tell me, what is the difference you feel between when you were being the successful dietitian and health and wellness coach and what you feel now?
Oh, it's a 180, Well, maybe it's not a 180. I've just supplemented it. This is what I say to people. So the work that I do primarily is on aligning with your core values. Because I think when you can align with the things that you value and live for and bring those things into your life on a regular basis, then you are going to show up as the very best version of yourself. And what I mean by that is, so let's say, for example, for myself, I know my values. My three top values are without question, health and well-being, connection, and making a difference, which is, I think, why we're all here anyway. We probably all share that one without even thinking about it. But the health for me value has expanded, right? Because in my earlier life, it was about physical well-being, right? In my work as a dietitian, in my fitness practices. But now that definition has expanded to incorporate inner well-being, mental well-being. And so it's still health, but it's a much bigger definition. Same with connection. I always loved the stage. I loved connecting with people, but my connection to spirit, to the unseen, is as strong, if not stronger. So that's how I would define that.
Oh, I love those definitions. They're so beautiful. Yeah, great. So we're going to wrap it up now. What I want to ask you is, what's the best thing that's happened to you today or this week?
Oh, the best thing that's happened, well, today, it's right here, right now. I mean, honestly, and I'm not saying that lightly. We talked before we went live, and your energy is so gorgeous. It's just, this is why we do what we do. And we need more people like us to spread the love.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I love that. So when you're having a moment, and I used to say when you're having a day that turns to custard, but now I've realized actually you can have a good day, but you can have moments that are not so good. So when you're having a moment that's not so good, what's your go-to? How do you pivot from that?
It depending where I'm at, and if I can, I don't plan for the moments. I mean, I definitely make nature a part of my day every day for sure. But if it's just in a moment where I need to regroup, I breathe. I take some really deep rooted breaths and I hold them and I let them go. I'm a huge advocate for yoga and for deep breathing and for nature. And it's something I'm trying to teach my kids. I mean, we can't all run into a yoga practice and we don't always have the opportunity to get outside in nature. But I say to my kids, just breathe.
Yes, that's free.
It's free.
Oh, breathe.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I say breathe. And if you need to, just get yourself into some sort of a pose, a yoga pose, and I'll show them that will allow you to kind of open up your spine and just like let, airflow. And yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. What takeaways would you like to leave our listeners with?
Oh gosh. Yeah, absolutely. How many do you want me to leave?
Well, look, honestly, you just go for it.
Oh my goodness. I have so many. Okay. I'm going to read them off fairly quickly then. I'm going to say, when you think about your loved one, think about your favorite character traits that you loved about them and try and embody them or bring them, into the things you do. So for example, with Mike, it was, his wisdom, it was his quirky sense of humor, it was his open door policy for people. So I tried to embrace that more, bring that more into my life. Or certainly, my kids do. Each one of my kids has some of his character traits. So it's wonderful. I get a piece of him all the time. I would say honor their memory in any way that feels good to you. Like we spoke about earlier, we've got a running list of things he used to say, and we pull it out at the dinner table and we laugh, and that's all good. And I would say talk about them. We never stopped talking about him. It never was awkward. It wasn't that taboo subject. We talked about him as if he was right there. We'd say, or he would say this, or he'd say this, or remember this. It was never an awkward thing. And I think that's so important to keep their memory alive. We pull out photo albums and look at him, and now with COVID again, we've pulled out so many of the old home videos and we laugh. I mean, yeah, and sometimes, the girls will giggle and I'll have to go upstairs and have a good cry. It's all good, but I would say do that. And then just know that it's okay to be okay, because you'll go through stages where you're not okay and you're just struggling, and it's moment to moment, as you say. And then you'll realize that, oh, wow, I've been feeling stronger now for a little while. And then you almost pull yourself back for a moment and say, that doesn't feel good. Okay. It doesn't feel right for me to be happy or smiling. Yeah, it does. Of course it does, because they wouldn't want anything less than that for you. So it's okay to recognize the steps that you're making toward being healthier and stronger and happier, and embrace it. Everybody deserves to be happy. Yeah. So those are, I guess, probably like my top 4, and then just find ways to nourish your soul. Whatever self-care practices you need. And we talked about some. We talked about nature and reading and being present. Just find ways to nurture your well-being. What's best for you. And, I'm not going to preach, but I wouldn't say turn to a wine bottle. I'd say turn to things that are going to nourish your soul, that are truly going to nourish your soul, not quiet it.
But oh gosh, Those takeaways are absolutely beautiful. And I know people are going to resonate with them. Like, as you were saying them, I was going, check, check, check.
Yeah.
And let me share with you, because this is really, really special for me. So, I'm probably close to 4.5 years into my grief journey after losing my beautiful child. And I have reached a place where I consistently feel joy and happiness. I wake up every day and I feel happy and I feel joyful. And that doesn't mean I still don't cry for her, because I do.
Mm-hmm.
But, I never imagined that I could just be in this incredible space.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful, honestly, so grateful that I have this opportunity to feel like this.
Yeah.
I've never felt like it before. So if that is why you need to suffer so much tragedy or grief, then know that there can just be the most magnificent upside to it.
Exactly. And you can't know how good that upside is until you experience the dark side, right? But that
Absolutely.
is so beautiful, and it's so much richer, as we say. And I feel like I'm in a position of advantage to so many people for what I've been through and for what I know and for how I live my life. And I love that what you said about joy. That's what I feel in my heart every single day. And it doesn't mean that it's always perfect every moment, but I know how to get back there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Wow, Lydia, this has been the most beautiful and empowering chat with you. I have just loved every moment. It was just like we were just in sync from the moment we connected, and like, I just know the value that our listeners are going to get from you. So just share how they can get in touch with you. I'll definitely put that in the episode notes, but just finish up by sharing how people can reach you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Well, the easiest way would be to visit my website at lydiaknorr.com. And on there are links to my social media handles. And you can find me at Discovering Y.O.U on Instagram. You can follow my Linktree links, which has a lot of podcasts and work that I've done, Linktree/Lydia Knorr. And that's it.
Ah, an absolute pleasure having you today.
Oh, thank you so much. You are so lovely. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode today, be sure to share it with others. Hit the subscribe or like button so you can be notified of each weekly episode. Also, let me know how I'm doing, especially if there's more you'd like to know that perhaps we didn't get time to touch on today or in past episodes. And if you're after resources to help you out on this journey, or more about the energy healing work I do, hit the Healing to Be You link. That's the word healing, number 2, letter B, letter U.com. So until next time, be kind to you, and thank you for joining us on the beautiful side of grief.